Hello, dear friends! I hope you will find this story interesting and that you will find something important for yourself. After all, even in the most difficult situations, you can find life-changing lessons. Your feedback and suggestions are always welcome. And now I want to share with you my story, which, unfortunately, is not so rare. I will tell you how my dreams were destroyed, how I lost everything that was important, and how I realized that trust is the most valuable thing in life. Now, let's take a look at what happened to me. My name is Harry, and I have always believed in my family. Since childhood, my children and I have been closely connected, celebrating every big and small holiday together, spending time together. My wife Alice was my support. And even when I eventually started to retire, I was sure that we would be fine. The children grew up, became adults. Each of them lived their own lives. And yet I was convinced that my family was my fortress. The children rarely came home, but I was never sad. Everything was fine. Every time I met them, I felt my soul fill with warmth. After all, I gave them as much love and support as I could. I had everything: a home, health, and family, and I thought it would always be like that. But recently something happened that I could not even imagine. Everything I held dear came crashing down so fast that I couldn't even stop it. Here's what happened. It all started when I started receiving fewer and fewer calls from my children. At first I didn't pay attention to it, because I thought they were busy with work and their lives. But then I realized something was wrong. My daughter Rachel, whom I always considered to be the closest, hadn't called for several weeks. I couldn't reach her, and it started to worry me. I decided to call my son. Though he said that he was just very busy, that he was doing great things, but he would definitely find time to come by. Sometimes he would send me messages on social media, trying to make it look like everything was fine, but I could tell it wasn't. Why did they suddenly become so distant? I thought it was just my old fear. Maybe I was too used to the attention of my children. But one event changed everything. One day, when I was on sick leave after a simple operation, I accidentally found out that my wife Alice was in a conversation with a real estate agent. They were discussing the sale of our house. I stopped and couldn't believe my ears. Alice, what's going on? I asked, barely able to control myself. Harry, it's not what you think. We're just considering our options, she replied, but her voice was clearly worried. From that moment on, everything changed. The feeling of awkwardness and fear that began to fill me grew stronger and stronger. I began to realize that something was happening in our family, but it was hard for me to believe that my children, my family, could betray me like that. From that moment on, I became more attentive to every detail. I noticed how my children began to avoid personal meetings, how they already had their own plans that did not include me. It was a painful blow because I used to trust them. How could this happen? I felt that my life was on the verge of a big change, but why couldn't I get an answer from my children? What happened to the closeness we had before? These questions remained unanswered, but they became the first wake-up calls for me that the situation was changing every day, and these changes were far from being for the better. What will happen next? This question tormented me, and I did not know how to answer it. But one thing was clear: my calm world was about to explode. And this was only the beginning of what I had to go through. Time passed slowly, and a burden grew on my heart. My children, whom I loved more than anything, were getting further away from me, and I couldn't understand why. And then, one day, when I returned home from another doctor's checkup, I felt even worse than usual. My thoughts weighed like stones. I felt uncomfortable. I sat down on my favorite chair in our living room, where we used to spend our evenings together, and started checking my mail. But among the usual bills and letters, I came across one unexpected piece of news. And it was a letter from a real estate agency that my wife Alice had started working with. It contained all the details about the sale of our house. My house. The place I had called my refuge for all these years. The place that was supposed to keep me safe in my old age. It was the same place where I raised my children, where we celebrated important moments in life. And I remembered how Alice and I had arranged each room, how we had sorted through the furniture together, and decided which carpet would be best for the living room. But now it was all just a paperwork for the agency. I couldn't understand why my children hadn't told me about this. I was in a panic. How was this possible? My children, my son and daughter, knew how important it was for me to stay in this house. Oh, why didn't they share their intentions with me? How did it happen that they decided to sell the house without my knowledge? My hands began to tremble. I could hardly hold the letter. Until that moment, I had always trusted my children. I believed that they cared about me, that they would always be on my side. I naively thought that when I got older, my children would be my support, and we would cope with all the difficulties together. But now it all looked completely different. I could feel the thread of trust I had held for so long cracking and breaking. I called my son, but he didn't pick up. Then I tried to contact my daughter, and she didn't answer either. This only increased my doubts and anxiety. Maybe I'm just old and don't understand why they do this. Maybe it was really a necessary decision, but why didn't they discuss it with me? I had a right to know that a couple of years ago, when we celebrated Christmas or a birthday together, there was not even a hint of such indifference. My children always shared important moments of their lives with me. Now, when they needed money or a new living space, they made decisions without me. I realized that I may have become a burden for them that they wanted to get rid of. It was hard to accept. As I sat there in silence, somewhere deep down I felt that this was just the beginning of something much worse. If even my children, who were the closest people to me, are ready to take such a step without my consent, where is the guaranteed support in my old age? What will I do if other issues related to my life remain in the dark for me? This feeling of frustration and fear made me feel anxious, and I couldn't suppress it. How can you go on living when your family is ready to make important decisions without you? How could I not notice these invisible threads that were gradually tearing me away from them? I felt that my trust had been betrayed. My children, with whom I had lived together for so many years, now seemed like strangers to me, and knew I was not ready to be left alone in my house without support, without even discussing important decisions. And it was painful. It was hard to survive. When I first received that letter from the real estate agency, I thought maybe it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe my kids decided to do something without me. But that doesn't mean they want to sell the house. I thought I should just talk to them and find out. But the more I tried to find answers, the more I felt the thread of trust that connected us disappear. The moment I called my son and asked him for his answer, I felt him avoiding my questions. He became cold and distant. He answered my questions briefly, not wanting to explain anything. I asked if there was anything I should know about selling the house, and he just sighed. "Don't worry. Everything is under control," he said, but his voice sounded like he didn't have the slightest desire to discuss it. And that was just the first sign that something was going wrong. I decided to talk to my daughter. And at first, she was silent for a long time on the other end of the line, and then she said that everything would be fine and that she should leave the matter to me. and she avoided my direct questions and answered as if I was just a burden to her. Her voice lacked the warmth and care I had felt before. It became clear to me that something was changing, and it was starting to scare me. The next day, I gathered all the documents related to the house and tried to check everything again. Something inside me pushed me to look at the signed papers again. I found that my children had already signed the sale agreements without my permission. I was shocked. How could this have happened? My children, who had been growing up on my lap since childhood, were now strangers. Why didn't they tell me the truth? Why did I find out about it only now? It was not a simple betrayal. It was a deep wound. I felt that my children were beginning to put their interests above my needs. I thought that when I got older, they would be my support, and now they were on the opposite side. I tried to talk to them again, but they kept ignoring my calls and messages. Instead of telling me their intentions, they became more and more distant. It was painful, but I couldn't yet fully realize what was happening. I couldn't understand how all this was possible. They were my family. How could I even allow myself to think that they could betray me? Now, every day I woke up with the feeling that my family no longer supported me. They had already made their choice, and it was hard to accept. But all my memories of how we laughed together, how we helped each other, how we celebrated family holidays together, now seemed empty and unreal. I began to feel anxious, which I could not explain. Why don't they want to talk to me? Why do I only learn about important decisions through papers and calls from real estate agents? What is wrong with me? And, most importantly, why do I feel that there is something more going on with my children than just a desire for money? My betrayal by my loved ones was becoming clearer, but I could not yet fully see how deeply it had penetrated my life. They were becoming more and more alien to me, and I didn't know how to cope with it. What would happen next? What were these changes in their behavior? They had become different people, and now my heart was torn with doubts and pain. What was really behind their actions? Are there even deeper motives that I don't know about? And what will I do if the betrayed ties become permanent? The day after I learned about the signed agreements, I still couldn't believe what was happening. I was sitting in my house, which had once been a place of warmth and peace, but now felt like a stranger in my own home. My hand was on the phone, and I hesitated to call the kids again. If it was just a mistake, they would explain everything right away, wouldn't they? But every time I dialed their numbers, I felt my heart clench with doubt. When I finally decided to call my daughter, her response was reserved and cold. She did not deviate from the standard phrases she always used when she wanted to avoid specific questions. But I was stubborn. I asked her directly, "Why did you decide to sell my house without my permission? Why didn't you ask me?" She was silent for a few seconds and then answered, "We decided it was best for everyone." Her voice sounded dry and emotionless. But I noticed something else. There was no longer the warmth in her voice that I was used to hearing. Instead, there was only cold logic and callousness, and I could feel her trying to avoid any personal explanation. She was no longer my daughter, who was experiencing this together with me. She was just a figure striving for her own goals, and my presence no longer mattered. And that same evening I met with my son. He was also in all of this. I couldn't keep it to myself any longer. I told him directly, "Why are you doing this? Why are you selling my house? I don't believe you anymore." He looked at me and seemed to be waiting for me to stop talking. And then, as if he was dropping his mask at once, he said, "You don't understand. We have our own plans. We can't leave things as they are. You can't control your life anymore. We need to move on. These words struck me like a thunderbolt. I couldn't believe that my children, who had once relied on me, now felt that I had become a burden to them. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a step towards getting rid of me. They didn't need my help anymore. They were going to go their own way, ignoring me. I sat on the couch, involuntarily feeling how hard it was to breathe. My life that I had built, my years, my work, everything seemed so insecure. I began to realize the depth of what had happened. My home, my property no longer had a place in their plans. Owen and I was left with only memories of the times when my children and I were one family. Now it was all falling apart like a house of cards that could not withstand the pressure. And now what? I was left alone with my own thoughts on how to resolve this situation. The pain and betrayal overwhelmed me, and I felt them drowning out everything else. What could I do to get back what I had lost? How could I regain trust if it had already been lost? I couldn't understand why my family had become so ruthless. Why did they no longer care about my fate? Why were my children, with whom I had gone through many difficult moments together, now becoming strangers? Perhaps I had become too old to be needed. Perhaps I no longer had the power and influence I once had. But one thing I knew for sure was that I was not ready to let it all go unanswered. Whatever happened, I had to do everything I could to stop their plan. They must not take away the last thing that was left of my life. If someone had ever told me that I would end up on the street, I would have just laughed in their face. After all, I had worked all my life, raised my children, tried to be a good father and grandfather. And now I was standing in front of an empty house that had once been my home, my comfort. I had nowhere to go, no money, no family to support me. I spent that evening on a park bench. Every sound, every shadow seemed threatening. I could feel the cold penetrating my bones, the loneliness filling my soul. It was the first time in my life that I had no shelter. Every thought hurt. I remembered how my wife and I chose this house, how its walls were our protection. Now it was just an empty cover. I was a powerless old man left to his own devices. I did not know where to look for help. My children, who had once been my pride, were now strangers. I was hurt, but I could not forgive them yet. How could you do this to a person who had given everything? How could you get rid of someone who was your family so easily? I started to remember the old days when everything was different. How I used to wake up early in the morning, go to work, putting all my heart and strength into what I did. How my wife and I dreamed of the future together. How I looked at my children and believed that they would be happy. But where are they now? Where is the love I've been trying to give them all my life? I remembered the moments when we sat around a table together, laughing, sharing news. And all this was gone now. Then I was left on the street without any hope that any would ever come and give me a hand. A few days later, I no longer slept on the bench. I found a temporary shelter, but it was only a shelter, not a home. And I felt that losing my dignity was an even greater tragedy than leaving my home. My dreams of the future were shattered into small pieces, and I didn't know if there was any point in starting again. But every day I asked myself, what do I do next? My family rejected me, but I couldn't let it end like that. Something inside me did not allow me to give up. There was still a spark of hope, which sometimes glowed and sometimes faded. But I could not give up. I was old, yes, but I was still alive. And as long as I was alive, I had a chance to change my life. I started thinking about what I could do. I may not have had the strength, but I still had my mind and experience. I knew that in order to change my situation, I needed to overcome the pain and fear. I started looking for a job, even though I realized that the chances were slim. My arms were no longer as strong as they used to be. but I still believed that I could find at least some help. Many thoughts were running through my mind, but most of all I was afraid that the time I had left would be wasted. Maybe I was too old to change anything in my life, but I knew one thing, as long as I was alive, I would not give up. But I couldn't get rid of the thought, what will happen next? My struggle was just beginning, and would I have the strength to change my life? My life changed in an instant, and now I'm trying to understand why it happened. What did I do wrong? I was abandoned, left behind, and I can't find an answer. I walked the streets looking for some hope, some support that I thought I would get from my children. But instead, I felt only pain and disappointment. I couldn't stop asking myself the same question. Why me? My children, with whom I had spent my whole life together, were now strangers. They didn't just sell the house, they took away the most valuable thing from me. Why? Why did they choose money over me, the father who gave everything for their well-being? I was their mentor, friend, and support, and now none of that mattered. Every day I faced new difficulties, and the financial situation was only getting worse. I tried to find a job, although I realized that it was almost impossible for my age. But I had no other choice. My pension was running low, and even what was left was quickly melting because of all these new expenses for housing, food, and medical care. In fact, no one helped me. Many people looked at me like I was some kind of burden. I tried to get a job, but every day I felt that no one needed me. I was not interested in talking about young people, new technologies, or trends. I could not hold on to this superficial reality because I had experienced a completely different world. A world where it was not so much about making money as about leaving something behind. But now I had nothing. I was alone, had no idea what to do next. I waited, hoping that my children would come to me, even if only for a moment. But they did not come. They were busy doing their own thing. I was just a shadow in their lives. What was happening to my life was so painful that every day seemed like an eternity. It seems like you give the best of yourself, and you get nothing in return. How much longer can I continue this struggle? And I tried to talk to someone, but everyone just looked away, as if I were invisible. How could I have been so naive to believe that my family would always be my support? Where were they when I needed them the most? Despite all the difficulties, I tried to find at least some opportunity, however small and insignificant, to get my life back on track. I started looking at options for work for the elderly, but the competition was very strong, and the offers I received were not attractive. Moreover, even when I tried to find a shelter, I was constantly faced with rejections. But despite everything, I knew I had to move forward. My pain was deep, but I couldn't afford to be broken. And I searched for answers, at least for myself, to understand why this happened and whether there was even a minimal hope that my life would change. With each step I felt more and more disappointed, but at the same time, it was as if something was holding me back from giving up completely. Maybe I hadn't reached the end yet. What if there was a way to turn back the clock? But there was no answer. There is no way to describe the moment when I learned that my children had sold my house. The very house in which I raised them, in which we experienced joyful moments and difficult times together. The one that was my last refuge. I was sitting in a small room when my lawyer called me and told me the news. For weeks I had been trying to contact my children, but all my calls went unanswered. Now I knew why. My children had decided that the house I had worked so hard to protect was just another thing to sell for a quick profit. My thoughts became heavy. I could not believe what had happened. They had sold the house where I had spent most of my life. Where were my hopes, my memories? Why did they do this? How could I have been so naive to think that my place in the family would always be important? Oh, I became one of those old people who are simply abandoned when they become unnecessary. I tried to contact them to find out why they did this, but their voices on the end of the line did not evoke sympathy or pity. They were calm, even defiant. They must have decided that I no longer mattered. My pain was so deep that I could not understand what had happened to the people I loved. Every step in this new world seemed more and more difficult. I felt helpless and betrayed. All these years I had held on to my family, hoping that they would be my support when I became old and helpless. But now I was on the street, without a roof, without anything. How can I survive this? What am I going to do now that my children have left me? My thoughts returned to the moment when I gave them everything I could. I invested all my resources, my soul in them. I gave them everything I was capable of, and now they have sold my life for a few $1,000s. Now the question arose, is it worth going to court? Should I go to court for what they did? This question tormented me. On the one hand, I felt they had made an irreparable mistake. They were supposed to be my support in my old age, but instead they became my enemy. But on the other hand, does it make sense to fight for something that has already been lost? I was haunted by the same question, is it worth all my pain? My children don't feel my pain, they don't feel what it's like to be old, abandoned, unprotected. They live their own lives, and they don't seem to care about me. I tried to find an answer, trying to understand why my children did what they did. What happened to us? Maybe I did something wrong. Maybe I didn't love them enough. But there was no answer, and they left me alone with my questions, and I couldn't find my way back. It seems that there is no place for old people in our society. We are just a burden to someone. My children probably thought I had no value anymore, and so they sold my house without thinking about how it would affect me. I couldn't stop feeling like my life was no longer meaningful. I had only one thing to try to move forward, although without a clear understanding of where I was going. All these thoughts and questions brought me back to the moment when I realized one thing: I could no longer be a part of their lives, and they no longer wanted to be a part of mine. Height was a new reality that was hard to accept, but it was real. What now? Would there be any hope for a renewed relationship, or was I completely alone? That evening I sat in an old fishing chair on the night terrace, staring at the endless dark sky. It seemed that even the stars had betrayed me. They no longer gave me the light that had once inspired me. Alone on my soul was heavy, and none of the memories I had once cherished in my head any power anymore, no longer gave me peace. Everything I had pinned my hopes on, my family warmth, my home, my future, seemed lost. And I couldn't seem to go back. Sometimes I just stood there and looked into the night, trying to see some signs that it was not over. But I saw nothing. My future, which I had been building all these years, was simply crumbling before my eyes. My dreams no longer had a place in this world. All these years I thought that life was not only about money or career. I believed that love and family were what really mattered. But now I was deceived, left alone. Instead of a future together with my children, I was left without any hope. My parents' love and sacrifice no longer had any meaning. They were selling not only my home, but also everything I once held in my heart. My hand, which had once held a warm cup of tea, was now empty. All these years I had been a calm, faithful father. I looked at my children and believed that they would not only follow in my footsteps, but would continue to do what I could not. Now I realized that maybe it was all just an illusion. Though if I hadn't been so naive, I would have seen these signs much earlier. My dreams of a future together simply did not fit into their world. They lived in a world where it was more important to sell than to keep. At all these years they had only been showing themselves to me, but now I saw their true face. I started to feel like everything I had was just disappearing. My children had not only taken my house, they took away part of my soul, part of my memories, part of my hopes for old age. In all of this, I felt like a superfluous person. I had built this house with my own hands, and now I had no right to it. I was just an old burden for those who left me. This world was no longer mine. My old age, which I had imagined to be calm and peaceful, had now become a ruthless reality. I became a burden that was better sold than kept. What now? How can you find hope when your entire history is destroyed? I felt that I had lost not only material things, but also a part of my essence. My thoughts kept coming back to the fact that I had never thought about this moment. Everything I had hoped for had become just an empty echo in my head. Now that everything was lost, I realized that there would be no more days when I felt needed. I had become just an old man who had been thrown to the curb. My dream of growing old with my family was shattered, and the only question left was, what to do next? How do you find meaning again in a world where all your hopes have been dashed? My story was no longer the same. I felt that even in the darkest moments there was something more than just suffering. I had a choice either to stay in this empty world with a sense of loss, or to look for a new path. Maybe it was a chance to start again, to start building a new life. But was it possible? I was beginning to realize more and more that maybe the real strength was not in holding on to the past, but in moving forward. And although my future no longer looked the way I had envisioned it, I realized that there was still a chance to find new meaning in it. Although it was difficult, I could not give up hope. Standing on the street without a roof over your head is a feeling that cannot be described in words. Doom, hopelessness, and a deep emptiness grip you. I looked at my life and saw how all my hopes, all my dreams, all my attempts to leave something behind that would be real had been destroyed. Now I was alone in a world that no longer had a place for me. My children, who had once been my pillars of support, had left me with nothing. It wasn't just the loss of my home, it was the collapse of my identity. I remembered how many years ago I used to sit around the table with them and dream about how we would celebrate every important event together. And here I was, standing on the cold sidewalk, all alone, with nothing, not even the comfort that my home had once provided. Now everything seemed empty. My soul lacked the warm light that my family had once given me. I had neither money nor shelter. I didn't even seem to have the strength to leave everything behind and start again. I looked at the crowd of people, and there was nothing in their eyes that could lift me up. I was just like them, just one of millions wandering through life without meaning. But the worst part was that I felt abandoned, even though I knew I could no longer rely on those I once loved the most. I was alone with my fate. I had already started to lose hope when I was suddenly attracted by the sound of footsteps. At first I didn't pay attention to it. Who could pay attention to me? An old man on the street. But as the footsteps got closer, I saw a stranger walking straight toward me. He was a middle-aged man with short hair and a stern expression. He looked like he was on his way, but here on the street, he seemed to stop to talk to me. "Are you okay?" he asked, stopping next to me. His voice was calm, but at the same time there was something in it that made me feel like this was not just a chance meeting. His gaze was observant yet attentive. "Well, how can I tell you?" I started to mock him, but the words got stuck in my throat. Something in his gaze made me stop. I didn't know why, but it was hard for me to turn away from this man. It was as if he understood what I was going through, even though he didn't say anything specific. The man looked at me and said, "I see that you are not completely alone in your thoughts. Do you want to talk?" I was surprised, and it's not every day that you're asked about your problems just like that, on the street. And I knew that this moment could be my last chance. "What do you want from me?" I asked, a little wary, but still inside I felt that I couldn't say no. He frowned as if considering something, and then answered, "I don't know. Maybe you just want to find a new path, don't you?" It was a strange thing to say, but I couldn't deny it. It was a thought that had been on my mind lately. If I could change my life again, start over, that would be exactly what I needed. I have some connections, and maybe there's a way to help you. But it all depends on how willing you are to open yourself up to new possibilities. He continued, looking me in the eye. Adana, there was something incredibly important in his words. He didn't look all the others who pass me by and don't notice. He was a man who was not afraid to touch someone else's misfortune to help. He was willing to help me even if it was dangerous or irrational. He showed me that there was still a chance, however tiny. And even though I didn't know where it would lead me, I felt like it might be my only chance for a new beginning. That moment changed everything. All my doubts, all my fears, all my feelings of doom, they suddenly receded. I was not ready to give up. I was no longer alone. And even if it was only the first step on the way, I knew I had to continue. But what would happen next? What awaited me in this new world? Every cell in my body screamed for revenge. I knew that my children had sold my last years, taken away what I had accumulated throughout my life. Moreover, they had sold not just the house, they had sold my heart, my soul, my hopes. And now I was left alone, on the street, with all the pain and disappointment they had brought me. Every day I woke up thinking about how I would punish them. I thought about all the ways I could make them feel the same pain I felt. But the more I indulged in these thoughts, the more I was overcome with deep sadness. Should I really go down this path? All these ideas of revenge that I had been fascinated with seemed so sweet, but they were also heavy. Every time I thought about them, I felt my heart fill with anger, and with it, emptiness. When you are on the brink, when your world is falling apart, you have to make a decision. This is what I was feeling right now. Should I fight them? Should I take revenge for the betrayal? Can I get everything back, get what they took away? I began to feel a sense of powerlessness. What do I really want from them? Do I really want my children to suffer like I did? They are human beings too. They just went their own way, trying to survive in a world that does not spare them. I began to realize that they too may have been forced to act the way they did. They probably did not realize the pain they were causing me. But it was not that simple. Gradually, I began to feel that their actions were not just a violation of my rights, but a betrayal that I could not forgive. How can you forgive a person who took away your hope for a peaceful future? How can you forgive those who destroyed your faith in humanity? And here I was again faced with a choice: take revenge or find the strength to forgive. My heart was beating hard in my chest. The revenge seemed so tempting, but what would it do? Would I be able to find peace in hurting others? Would I turn myself into the person I hate? On the other hand, forgiveness required a great deal of strength from me, strength that I lacked. How can you forgive those who have betrayed you? Can I find peace in giving up my feelings to them? But, whatever one may say, I was not alone in my struggle. All the people around me were divided into two camps. Some supported my desire for revenge, indignant at the injustice and betrayal. They said, "You can't just forgive them. that they must be held accountable for their actions. Their voices were loud, they inspired me to take revenge, but at the same time they carried the same anger and pain that I felt. Others, on the contrary, called for forgiveness. They said that there is enough pain in this world, and that only through forgiveness can one find true peace. They pointed out that revenge will never bring satisfaction and will not allow you to feel true freedom. And so I stood on the edge between two paths. The path of revenge, which seemed so attractive, and the path of forgiveness, which seemed difficult and long. I felt time running out, and every step I took brought me closer to the inevitable choice. But how could I decide, not knowing what it would bring? I remembered when I was younger, when I was told, "You choose who you are. Let you decide whether to remain human or become evil." And then I realized that I don't want to become evil. I want to keep something human in me, even if it's hard. Now I had a choice, and I couldn't afford to make a mistake. I slowly took a step forward, thinking about the future and what I could create, even if it was a new life without my family, without what I had considered mine for so long. But what would happen next? What will this choice bring? We live in a world where time does not stand still, and the events that take place can change everything in an instant. I had long ago lost all hope of a normal life. I felt like the ground was slipping away from under my feet. My children, whom I raised and loved, left me to fend for myself. My home, the only place that had been my refuge, became a stranger, and I seemed to have nothing left to lose. I was about to finally let go of everything, consumed by despair and disappointment. I was ready to accept the fact that my family no longer existed. I didn't know where to go or why to move forward at all. But just when I was about to break down completely, something happened that I could not have imagined. This call from a number I didn't recognize came as a real shock to me. At first, I thought it was another scam or some kind of advertisement, but when I picked up the phone and heard a voice that caused me a wave of emotions, I realized it was something completely different. Do you want to know who's really to blame for everything? This voice asked. It became difficult for me to breathe. I could barely get the words out. Who is it? The voice continued. I have important information about your situation, and I think you need to know it. It was a man I hadn't paid much attention to, but his words sounded serious, and each one of them seemed to drive another brick into my inner world. The voice on the other end of the line told me that his connections in legal and financial circles allowed him to find out some details about my children. And it turned out that the whole situation I was facing was the result of a completely different person, an outside influence that was much deeper than I could have imagined. My children, of course, had their share of the blame, but they were not acting on their own. There was another side to the whole story, and it was the same voice on the other end of the line. It turned out that my children had been manipulated by someone else's hand, and they themselves were unaware of all the schemes they were involved in. Despite my anger and despair, I felt myself starting to rethink my situation. I thought I had found the guilty, that I had every reason to be angry and revengeful. But now everything looked different. My children were not the only perpetrators. There was another, much darker part to it all. My thoughts were short but significant. I did not know what to do next. Every new detail I learned made me feel even more confused than before. Could I really forgive my children if they were involved in all this? Maybe I was part of this game myself? Had I fallen victim to the same world that tries to play with people by exploiting their weaknesses? How can one choose the path of truth when the whole world seems to be just an illusion? I was again faced with a difficult choice. My children may not have acted with malice, but my heart was burned. I felt that everything I had been through was extremely difficult, and I could no longer just forgive. Ada, maybe I was ready to find retribution for everything that had happened. But at the same time, I realized that anger is a heavy burden. If I let it fill my soul, I would become like those I hated. And this thought was too heavy for me. The choice was made. Whether it would be revenge or forgiveness, I did not know until the end, but I knew one thing: this would not be my last battle. I was ready for anything, even if it meant finding a new path in a world that seemed lost to me. I wasn't sure I could forgive, but I knew for sure that I would not live in constant anger. My struggle was not only with my children or the whole world, it was also with myself, and this was the most important choice in my life. Now I just had to figure out what would happen next.